If you want a medium SUV and you have what the manufacturers are calling an adventurous spirit, then this new Nissan X-Trail N-Trek might be for you, because it has a couple of extras to make it a little bit more off-road focused, even though mechanically it's no different to any other X-Trail 4x4. Now, if you were looking at the X-Trail N-Trek and you thought, what can I compare it against, starting at $47,290 for the front-wheel drive version, well then really the only option is the Subaru Forester Sport, which starts at $45,690 for an all-wheel drive, because it's kind of the only other medium SUV in the same price bracket that has the same off-road focus, even though it's exactly the same mechanically as every other Forester. What it is about with both of these cars is blacking out a whole bunch of stuff, making them a little bit more rough and ready, adding bits of orange on the Subaru, which is pretty obvious, you can't miss that. And inside, the Subaru has water repellent seats, which are cloth, and the Nissan has water repellent adventurer seats, which are vinyl. So that's kind of about it. But we just wanted to see if you really want to do what the manufacturers think these cars can do, bit of off-roading, kind of not extreme, but beyond what a lot of people will probably do, as well as testing them out for what they can do as a family four-wheel drive, then maybe one of these cars is perfect for you.
Chasing cars, honest reviews of your next car.
Brought to you by
Budget Direct.
Now, the Forester Sport launched in Australia in 2021, and this generation of Forester launched in 2018. It's actually being replaced by a completely new car, although with the same petrol engine, in 2025. So really, we've only got sort of 6 to 12 months left of this generation. So at some point, there's going to be a really good deal on this Forester Sport, even though it is already really well priced. Now, what the Sport brings is the usual blackout stuff at the front, the metallic dark orange, like I mentioned, around the roof rails, around the rim job, around the bottom of the side skirts, and at the front. It does have its own black 18-inch wheels. It has little mirror caps that look like carbon fiber, but they're not. They're just mottled plastic. A black panel at the back, those seat trim that I mentioned on the inside, but generally it's ubiquitous Forester, which is 220 millimeters of ground clearance, full-time all-wheel drive, 2.5 litre flat four, CVT transmission. Now, the X-Trail N-Trek follows pretty much exactly the same blueprint. It has a lot of blackout stuff, in this case, gloss black everywhere, grille, lower bumper, which is new for this, plus new LED lights for the N-Trek, similar to the LED lights in the Forester Sport. It has its own unique 18-inch wheels, similar to the own unique 18-inch wheels in the Forester Sport. See where I'm going here? It's kind of the same treatment. Gloss black mirror caps, gloss black door handles, has a black, although matte, bit on the sill here. It is available with a black roof in some colors, including this ceramic gray, the silver, and the champagne. But it's a bit over $5,000 more than the Subaru for this 4x4 version. This is $50,890 before on-road costs. Now, underneath, same, very similar to the Subaru, 205 millimeters of ground clearance, which is 15 less than that vehicle, 2.5 litre direct injection 4-cylinder, just like every other X-Trail that isn't the e-Power. Yeah, it's very much the ubiquitous Japanese medium SUV, but these both have a lot of things going for them, albeit in a completely different flavour, as we shall discover. The Forester Sport's shape is a lot more pragmatic. It is virtually sheer on the sides, although it does have a subtle wheel arch drawn in above the back axle and the front axle, and a slight rising swage line along the side, but it's all very subtle. Mostly it just looks slab-sided. And the side glass also does lean in a bit, but it's almost barely curved. Like, it is all about maximizing the interior space. This is a slightly shorter car than the X-Trail with a slightly shorter wheelbase, and I think slightly less front and rear overhangs and a little bit more ground clearance. So it is very much about achieving the task that it set out to do as a priority over looking pretty. Now, at the back here, the Forester Sport does have this black panel at the back to try and lessen the impact of these tail lights. When we finally see the 6th generation Forester in 2025, I think it's really going to make this generation look dated. But for now, it does the job, and if that's all that matters for you, then that's important. It also does have an electric tailgate, which the Nissan does not have. And inside here, we do have 498 litres of boot space compared to 465 in the 7-seat Nissan. And we do have a full-size alloy spare underneath here. I should point out too that the Subaru's wheels are 18s like the Nissan's, but they only have 225 55 18s, whereas the Nissan has 235 60 18s. So a little bit puffier tyres, a little bit better off-road, and a little bit less easy to curb. The thing about the X-Trail N-Trek is that it actually is quite handsome to look at. It's not just a slab-sided box like the Subaru, although it isn't as well packaged. So the thing that I like the most is this sort of blistered rear wheel arch that comes out and over the back axle and then blends into the taillights here. I think it looks really nice from behind. It is a bit of a Nissan styling trait at the moment. In here, the N-Trek doesn't have an electric tailgate, so it's really easy to lift it up, but it is not so easy to put it back down again. It's really quite heavy. If you're a little bit slightly built, and that may be a problem. In the boot here too, we only have 465 litres behind the rear seat with it all the way back, not 585 like the 5-seater, because we do have those two little dicky seats buried in the rear floor. You can slide the middle row all the way forward, as we've talked about, but it isn't quite as holistic as the Subaru or a 5-seat X-Trail. And underneath the floor here too, even though we have a luggage cover here, even in its proper position, it still moves around. So when you go over bumps and really thrash this Nissan 4x4 around, it does make a little bit of noise from the boot that otherwise wouldn't be there in the 5-seat version. The first thing you notice in the Forester Sport is its airiness. This glass area is amazing. And the fact that it has this enormous glass sunroof as standard adds to that effect, both for front and back passengers. Even though it isn't a full panoramic roof, it is huge. The second thing is the treatment of the upholstery. The N-Trek just adds that seat trim. Everything else is kind of the same. Whereas the Sport in the Forester is holistic. It actually changes quite a lot. We've got all the orange stitching on the dash, all down the sides of the console here. This padding on the edge of the console, actually lean your shin against that, which is actually quite smart. We've got that same dark orange metallic around the gear shifter, the drive mode dial on the bottom of the steering wheel, more orange stitching along the doors, and this water repellent cloth upholstery that is only basically cloth inserts. The rest of it is just vinyl with orange stitching, is on the centers of the seat all the way up to the headrests here and all the way across the tops of the doors here. So it does have a feeling that you're in a model that is distinct. It even has Sport in the instrument dials here with more orange detailing in there as well. So while it is not a Sport, because it drives exactly the same as any other Forester, it does have an element of sport chic about its look. Now, the Nissan is quite a lot better than the Forester when it comes to storage, and I think this is where the Subaru is starting to show its age. This sort of 1 litre, 1.25 pump bottle just fits into the front and rear doors, but it's got to be jammed in and it's bent. These are for 1 litre tops, really. Camping bottles really will not fit unless they scratch the doors. Even something like an iPhone 15, which is a current model iPhone, doesn't fit in the tray in here. It sort of sits slightly askew because it's now too big for whatever phone was designed to go there when this car was designed pre-2018 when it came out. The cup holders in the center here are pretty good. There's a little tray here. I've got a padded armrest here with another little bit of stuff in the middle there, but it's not as big as the X-Trails, and it doesn't have the tray underneath. It's all kind of low and not really there. I do like the fact that the sun visors have these little extenders. So if you go there and there's lots of sun, it does have something like that, but it does bang against the Subaru EyeSight plastic here, sometimes over bumps if you've got it pushed all the way forward. The rest of it, I bitched about this in 2021, saying the Subaru had too many screens, but now when I look at it, I go, oh, there's not really that many because everything is about screens. But continuing the pattern of before, none of them match. They don't have the same fonts. This one in the dial here, like I was saying, you can't read the speedo and the fuel consumption at the same time. It's one screen or the other, whereas the X-Trail gives you both of those, plus a head-up display as well. The 8-inch touchscreen in here, which has had its CD player removed since this car went on sale in 2021, is wired Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, but with similarly surprisingly impressive sound from its 6 speakers like the X-Trail. We do have seat heating, 2-setting seat heating with cloth seats in here that the X-Trail doesn't have. It's another feature combined with the sunroof. We also have 8-way electric adjustment for both front seats, which is also something the X-Trail doesn't have. So you do have a lot more adjustment, although they are a lot flatter than the Nissans. You feel like you're sitting sort of more on a lounge than sort of enveloped in a bucket. And you do feel like you're sitting more on top of the Subaru than in it. That said, the vision out of this thing is amazing. Being able to see the lumps in the bonnet there is probably quite reassuring for the shorter people among us. The steering wheel's nice and grabby to hold. Most of the switches are pretty easy to work out. The climate control is easy to work out, typically crisp and extremely cold, just like the Nissans, as per most Japanese cars. There's not much to really dislike in here. I suppose it's just that the multimedia, you know, 2 USB-A ports and an old auxiliary plug down here, 2 USB-A in the back, that doesn't fit where 2024 is. So the new generation Forester will completely wipe that clear. It'll be all wireless smartphone connectivity. But for now, this does the job, but it definitely is in a previous era when it comes to technology, but is still right at the benchmark when it comes to packaging. The back seat is similarly huge like the Nissans. You do have that really deep belt line. You do have amazing vision, but it doesn't have an adjustable backrest rake. It's sort of fixed in one position, which is a little bit far back for my level of comfort. But if you can fit 3 child seats across the back, the top tethers are at the base of the backrest, whereas the Nissan center one is up in the ceiling. So you're going to have a belt up through everyone's vision and potentially through the middle of your luggage. The Subaru's rear cushion doesn't slide either, but there is a ton of legroom and a lot of clever little places to put stuff in the storage behind the both front seat backrests. Now, there's only 3-ish years or so between the age of the design of the current 5th generation Forester and this current generation Nissan X-Trail, the Nissan being the newer of the two. But I think that it's most noticeable inside the vehicles that the Subaru is right at the end of its life and the Nissan still has quite some time to go. Now, the seating positions and that are quite different in that the Subaru has a very low belt line, very glassy, upright windscreen, those sheer sides like we pointed out before where it really maximizes packaging space, whereas the Nissan has a more raked windscreen, more tumble home in the glass house. It just feels sportier to look at, it definitely is, and it feels sportier sitting in the driver's seat here. Now, I've got quite a nicely bolstered seat here, considerable bolsters on the side, fully electric for the driver, but only manual for the passenger and no height adjustment. Although it doesn't really matter in the case of the Nissan X-Trail here because that seat is actually still really comfortable. Now, what is a little bit unusual is this water repellent upholstery in this N-Trek, which is just vinyl. It says synthetic leather, but it's the same thing, right? And so, of course, water doesn't penetrate it because it can't. It's just got this pattern in the middle that looks a little bit like a plastic reptile. And the first time I touched it, I thought it was going to be cloth, and I put my hand on it and went, oh, gross. But it's not so bad, and I do get that it probably is fine if you're wearing swimmers from the beach and stuff like that, and you're putting water and adventure style items inside, then fine. It makes sense, but it isn't as enveloping as the Subaru's cloth, certainly not with the cloth all down the doors. Now in here, the rest of the trim is a little bit at odds with that. It doesn't really fit the adventure theme. We have chocolate across the top of the dash and the tops of the doors here. This door here though, if you lean your arm on it when I'm driving, I keep noticing that it creaks all the time, which is just a build fault in the car. We do have this sort of weird wood section in the dash, which doesn't seem very adventure-y to me, but wood is in a forest, so you never know. It is completely smooth, it's all fake, but that's fine. I think the general layout of the interior though is really nice. This 12.3-inch screen here, plus a 12.3-inch driver's information screen, which means you can have the average fuel consumption and the digital speedo on at the same time, which the Subaru won't let you do. You also have a head-up display in this N-Trek, which is actually really quite useful. The Apple CarPlay and Android Auto in this is wireless, so you don't need to be plugged in here. You do have USB-C ports front and back rather than just USB-A's in the Subaru. So we're a generation on when it comes to multimedia, even though both of them have 6-speaker stereos and they're really that far between each other for sound quality. They're both really good, given that they're the basic stereo, certainly compared to some of the other ones we've heard lately in some less expensive Chinese vehicles. The phone, this is an iPhone 15, comfortably fits here, which is obviously what it's made for. We also have a tray under here. It also says Nissan established 1933 Yokohama, which is kind of cool, a little bit Jeep-esque in this N-Trek. got a thing in here between the front seats, a little bin. But best about the X-Trail is that all 4 doors take full 1.5 litre bottles comfortably, whereas the Subarus, you really have to wedge them in. They're not really meant for that. And the driving position, while the trim is a little bit odd and does make you sweat, unlike cloth, the steering wheel is really well shaped. You can sit down nice and low. You feel very much enveloped and part of the car, yet you still have really good vision. I can still see the bonnet, see the lumps over the wheel arches. And in the back, you've got full fore-aft adjustment of the seat, just like the previous X-Trail. You've got fantastic theatre vision, just like the previous X-Trail. You've got blinds in both of the rear doors. And so if you need to maximize the boot space, because the 7-seater does eat into cargo volume a little bit, you can slide that back seat all the way forward and have an even longer area there, and with the little dicky seats, as we shall call them, because they're virtually borderline unusable, but they are there for a legal way to seat children rather than just throwing them in the boot like we did when we were kids and having them come along for the ride. So even at 6.5 years of age, this generation of Subaru Forester still drives really competently. It is consistently good at what it does, even if it doesn't smack you in the face with its ability in dynamic respects. It is just like all of its previous generations that weren't an XT, meaning the non-turbo ones, where the more you ask of it and the harder you drive it, the better it gets. You essentially drive through the Forester's steering feel, through its tyre grip, and engage its chassis and its inherent balance, and it is a real driver's car. It has a fluency and a communication and a connection that makes it flow through corners. It lets you know what's coming. It may not have the Nissan's initial grip, it certainly does not. It doesn't have the Nissan's keenness of steering feel. It doesn't dart into corners. It's all a little bit more measured, but the way that it behaves is more progressive and definitely more confidence inspiring. The Nissan will step its tail out a bit on occasion. It feels edgy where the Subaru feels supple and polished. Now, the first thing you notice the moment you get in them, besides what we've already been through with the glass house and the seating and the vision and stuff, is that the Subaru rides significantly better than the X-Trail. It feels level and cushioned and absorbent and nice and supple. It does get a little bit messy when it's going through really bumpy corners. It does sort of move the body around a bit, and it does appear that it doesn't have the Nissan's body control, but when you ask for everything that it has, it demonstrates that it does, even though it will hit the bump stops in the front end, certainly off-road, a little bit quicker than the Nissan because it is more softly suspended. Now, on-road, the handling is nicely balanced. It doesn't feel like it wants to eagerly dive into corners, but it does when you ask it of the car. It has Sport and Intelligent button on the steering here, and Sport definitely adds a layer of meat to the steering that doesn't make it too heavy, but it just makes it feel a little bit more connected and a little bit sort of less airy-fairy than it is in Intelligent. So it has all of those abilities there. It's just that you need to be able to ask it from the car. And for most people, what really matters is the ride. So who really cares about that stuff? But it's good to know that deep down, this generation of Forester Sport is still a Subaru and still can be sporting. Now, the Subaru's engine is so close to the Nissan's when it comes to outputs. 136 kilowatts, which is 1 kilowatt more, 239 newton meters, which is 5 newton meters less. It's a 2.5 litre, but it's a flat 4, not an inline 4. It has the CV2 automatic that does spool up a little bit quicker than the Nissan's. It does give a little bit sort of extra throttle response off the line. I think that it's sort of easier to maintain speed on. The Nissan has a little bit extra throttle tuning to make it feel peppier than it really is, but for the most part, it's much of a muchness. The Subaru is slightly more economical while drinking 91 octane. They both drink the same. The Subaru is slightly faster to 100. It is so close that it really comes down to personal preference. And I don't actually even know what that is. I like both of them. I quite like the flat 4 thrash that the Forester still has, although I kind of wish that it still had the throbbiness of the past. That's been refined out. It's a lot smoother than it used to be. I think that the CVT in the Forester is better at transmitting torque, and the all-wheel drive system in the Subaru is definitely better. Now, off-road, you can feel the superiority of the Subaru's drive system. It is using its rear axle all the time, and you can feel it. you access off-road mode by getting the dial here and twisting it to the left, which brings up a little inclinometer, like the incline this way and that way on the screen up here. So this screen does have a purpose. That little bit extra sort of adds a bit of flavour to the Forester Sport's off-road focus. It also automatically engages hill descent control should you want it to be there. It goes straight into it. It doesn't have to be manually selected like in the Nissan. I think that the Subaru's ride off-road is better, and certainly its traction is better. You can feel it being more seamless and more supple and smoother, and that's generally the same of the flavour of the car on road. But like I said, it does touch its bump stops a little bit quicker, and I think that its nose, while it still will brush it occasionally through certain bumps, is a little bit shorter than the Nissan's, so it has a tiny bit better approach angle, but it's really much of a muchness. Now, Subaru's eyesight safety system is known for its comprehensiveness in all departments, and there's one area in particular that the Forester is way better than the X-Trail, and that is adaptive cruise. It is excellent. It can go through bends, overtake other cars, whatever. It doesn't slow down. It knows exactly what it's doing. It's really good at trusting the cameras and what the car is doing, and I suppose you're driving as well. There are moments where lane departure warning will kick in. It does have steering assist, where if you try and change into another lane and you know that you've overtaken another car but it thinks you're still too close, it will fight you with the steering to try and stop you from changing lanes, which can make your driving look a little bit erratic. It does have rear parking sensors, but I have parked this car with Apple CarPlay playing and it does not dull the music. You cannot hear the rear parking sensors. You're purely relying on the camera, and I don't think that that is actually a smart feature, and I don't think that AEB at the rear works all the time either. The front AEB, on the other hand, is very much on its game. It's fairly persistent in the way that it works, but it's also, I don't think I've driven a Subaru with the eyesight system that I have bonded with as well as in this Forester Sport. It seems to work very well, and you don't have to turn stuff off. And if you want to turn the steering assist off, you just hit one button on the wheel and it goes away, which makes the screen in the center there a little bit bigger, which is a very dated screen. I think we'll just come back to the last thing about the Forester, and that is the age of the vehicle. I haven't driven a car in ages that I've used the analog speedo in so often, because the screens in the middle just don't quite blend with everything else. And we've got these three screens here like we've been through, but I suppose in the center here, if you're only driving the Forester as your only car, then 8 inches is definitely going to be enough. It's always been enough, but in these days it seems you need 10 or more. And once you've been in the X-Trail with its 10.25 inch screen, you start to see that this is very much yesterday's vehicle. And now that we've already seen what the 6th generation Forester looks like with its big portrait screen, very much inspired by the current Outback, but also a lot of more luxurious finishes, a lot better looking on the outside, and a bigger vehicle. If this is already a packaging maestro in this size of Forester, then I wonder how much better the next generation one really can be. You can probably tell by what we've been through that the N-Trek treatment in an X-Trail is a little bit expedient. It isn't holistic. It's just adding on stuff to a vehicle that already had most of that stuff, whereas the Forester is a little bit more thought about in terms of a package and what it brings as a point of difference. The thing about the X-Trail though is that what isn't expedient is the way this 4th generation of X-Trail drives. It is so much better than all of its predecessors, much sharper and less obstructive and less soft than its previous generation, and just transformed compared to the first two, which were absolutely terrible to drive. Let us know what you think in the comments if you think otherwise, but I road tested them when they were new and they were terrible. So this is nothing like that. Actually, it's really sharp, it's keen in the steering. This driving position here, like I've already mentioned, the steering wheel feels great to grip hold of here with your thumbs, really nice huggy seat despite the vinyl, and just a general feeling of dynamism. It sits on its outside back wheel and corners. It's really chuckable and fun to throw around, and that aspect of the X-Trail is absolutely the defining part of the way that it drives. Now, the drivetrain, 2.5 litre direct injection 4-cylinder CVT automatic transmission, on-demand all-wheel drive in this instance. That gives 135 kilowatts, 244 Newton meters. It weighs around 100 kilos more than the Subaru based on manufacturer claims, although the Subaru's is tear, but you can't really feel that on the road. They generally feel pretty much the same. And what sets the Nissan's engine apart is that it's just a little bit sportier to rev out. It doesn't have that flat four sound that the Subaru's has, but it definitely has an edge. And given the age of this engine, it actually is really quite likable and really quite amenable. We've tested it 8.7 seconds 0 to 100, which is pretty good, but the Subaru is ever so slightly faster and ever so slightly more economical. As you can probably tell, the differences between these two cars is really minimal. It is simply about the flavor of the cars. Now, the Nissan doesn't ride anywhere near as well as the Subaru, despite having those 235/60 18-inch chubby tyres. It has a less cushioned feeling over bumps. It sort of jostles around and bops around a bit. It can be thrown around a bit, certainly over really big heaves where the Subaru feels like it has better body control, even though it is softer. The Nissan is a little bit edgier in the way that it behaves. And when driven on-road, that isn't a problem most of the time, although it can shift around a bit in the middle of corners over bumps. Off-road, it's actually less of a problem than I thought it would be. The Nissan seems to have a bit tighter body control than the Subaru. It can take really big hits without brushing its bump stops a little bit easier. Its all drive system also does a pretty good job off-road, but it doesn't quite have the sort of fluency and the all-round use of the Subarus. You feel like the Nissan's transferring drive to the back, whereas you can sense that the Subaru is using its back end all the time. In the Nissan, you need to use the drive dial here to put it into off-road, which is all the way around to the left to the mountains. There's a sport mode there to the right as well, which does make the throttle very sensitive and makes the engine rev up a little bit quicker, but not really to any great extent. It's sort of all a bit of a waste. Off-road, you need to push the hill descent control in the middle to get it to engage, otherwise it's not there. But it does work fairly effectively. It all is pretty automatic. Once the car starts going down a hill and you're braking, it'll pick a speed and hold it there. And if you turn ESC off in the Nissan, it stays off. So it has the basics of what you need for a medium SUV that you might also take off-road and be a little bit adventurous with by using what the blackout effect on the outside and those chubby tyres kind of imply from this type of vehicle. Now, the Nissan's safety systems are extensive, including rear AB and rear cross traffic alert, lane assist, steering assist, etc. The thing that stands out though is that it's adaptive cruise control, while being very on the money in terms of trying to keep you in your lane and being fairly zealous in that sort of stuff. It does tend to freak out a bit when it's going through bends with cars in the other lane. It will occasionally slam its brakes on when it doesn't need to. I just instantly floored it to try and drive through it, and you have to do that multiple times. It is not very delicate in the way that it lets you drive around other vehicles. It is definitely too oversensitive. But other than that aspect of the adaptive cruise not quite being on the same wavelength as the driver, the rest of the car is actually really likable. It is the only X-Trail ever that is actually a driver's car. It's fun to drive, but it's also really good at seating at least 4 people, if not 5, and at an absolute pinch, 7. But on a pure cost basis, it's a little bit more expensive to buy than the Subaru. It's a little bit more expensive to run than the Subaru, even though the servicing's slightly less. It doesn't quite have as good a resale. It doesn't quite have as good a equipment, and that sort of stuff could be seen as not quite offering enough value. But the Nissan does demand a little bit more out of your bank account in the first place, and it may not give you quite the same back at the end of your ownership experience. So from a pure money perspective, it isn't quite as sensible as the Subaru, but it definitely has a driving flavor that it's never had before, and it's a driving flavor that I really enjoy. Giving a definitive verdict on the Subaru Forester Sport versus the Nissan X-Trail N-Trek 4x4 isn't as easy as you might think. I think the best way to surmise the difference between the two is that the Subaru is very much family focused, with any of the rough edges softened off. It is all about ride and maximizing passenger space and maximizing vision. And in that respect, It is extremely comfortable and a really likable vehicle. It's very easy to drive and it's very easy to live with. The X-Trail has a little bit more dynamic flavor. It's definitely more of a handling biased car than the Subaru. And I know it sounds weird saying the Nissan's the handler and the Subaru isn't. And it's not that it isn't, it's just that it's not as instantly in your face as the Nissan. The Nissan encourages you to drive quickly and keenly, which unlike no other X-Trail ever made. And so in that respect, certainly from a driver's perspective, the X-Trail is a more interesting car, but the Forester is cheaper to purchase. It's a much more pragmatic vehicle and also has almost 5% better resale after 3 years. So once you add up all those little bits and pieces, even the drive away price is roughly $3,000 less in New South Wales than it is for the X-Trail 4x4. So again, all of these numbers start to add up. So anyone who's sitting there with their spreadsheet with a pen going away doing all these numbers kind of says that even right at the end of its life, the Forester Sport is the smarter choice. But certainly from my perspective, I think the X-Trail looks better, it's more entertaining to drive, the multimedia systems and the way everything works in the interior, and even the storage, certainly for the front row, is a little bit better. You don't need to have the seats in the boot, which means you have an even bigger boot than the Subaru, and you know, there's just a little bit more sizzle about it. That said, in a year's time, we'll have a brand new Forester, so this situation may completely change. But if you enjoy driving, really enjoy driving, the X-Trail is the car for you. But if you want everything to work for all members of the family, then really, the Forester is still a really hard medium SUV to go past. If you haven't subscribed, please do so below the video. Tell us what you think about my verdict about the Forester versus the X-Trail, or about chasing cars. Thanks for watching.